Hello again, book lovers. Stonehenge! What do you know about Stonehenge? Well, I read a book about it, so I know a lot more than I did. And this book is by Mike Parker Pearson, who led the Stonehenge Riverside project from 2003 to 2009. And this basically is the book that describes what they did, what their new theories are, and Stonehenge's place in British history. Having read the book, this last fact has been underlined to me. It is an incredible and unique monument, which we marvel at, but perhaps we don't marvel enough at it. There are the mysteries of how they got the blue stones from Preseli. There is the mystery of what the hell it is. And truth to tell, we may never know. But this book sheds a lot of archaeological light on the subject. The first part I didn't find that interesting. It takes you through the actual digging, and although I love ancient history, I don't like the getting your hands dirty bit where you have to sieve through soil and look at tiny little bits of bone fracture. Although, for those of you that are interested, there are some interesting little side notes here. We learn that the stone carvers knelt rather than stood or squatted or sat on chairs to do their work, which I found a bit surprising. I imagined the squatting posture would have been universal. But there they've got the knee prints. There are traces of phosphorus on some of the sleeping areas in the houses at Durrington Walls, which were discovered. Yes, there were Neolithic houses there, which tells us that they were children's beds. How do we know that? Well, because the phosphorus come from the bedwetting. There's also a chapter that explains how earthworms can distort chronology. This is all very interesting, just not my cup of tea. Later on in the book, I became more and more engrossed. I wasn't aware of Blue Stonehenge, or the other henge known as flagstones, which was, by a quirk of history, discovered under Thomas Hardy's house, and is now cut through by a main road, unfortunately. As I've said before, the aspect of ancient history that I do enjoy is filling in the blanks in the jigsaw, and here are a few ideas to conjure with. How about there were lots and lots and lots of henges at the time, especially all over Salisbury Plain, which I also discovered has been unwooded for at least 5,000 years, something else I found surprising. The henges then, of course, would have been made of wood. But how about this other conjecture? Stonehenge was a movable monument that would be picked up and placed somewhere else in future times. That's very speculative. There is a thesis behind this, which is that the settlement at Durrington Walls, where people lived or gathered, and they would go from there along an avenue to Stonehenge to do whatever they did. Now the thesis is that this represents the passage from the living to the dead, also represented by wood as a transient material and stone as an eternal material. We also learn that Stonehenge isn't copied from anywhere. It predates anything similar, and there's nothing too similar anyway in Europe that we know of. And at the end provides the updated chronology, which is pretty much the aim of the excavation. So the updated story is that there is a natural chalk line where Stonehenge is, which aligns with the solstice sunrise. This became a graveyard, but that was a long, long time in the past. We're talking about thousands of years of timescales here, so we remember Stonehenge might have been something for 100 years or 500 years, and then it fell into disuse, which is what seems to have happened. Oh, you will learn it's not actually a henge because of where the ditch is, but first we got the ditch, then there was a stone circle, a kind of wood henge, being replaced by the final megaliths that we know and love so well. There's some excellent artists' impressions of how the place would have looked at various stages in its history. And indeed, we get a little bit of geology, a little bit of geography, and a lot of Neolithic and posterior sociology. If you were to say Stonehenge to an English person in their 60s, like me, the word association test might throw up Druids and festival. Well, Druids get short shrift here because there's not a lot of evidence to connect earlier types of peoples to the stones. And the genealogy of the people living in Britain at the time is very interesting. There seemed to have been a wave coming in from the west via the sea. And then later on we get the influx from other parts of the so-called Beaker people, who were the subject of much debate. In any case, let's fast forward. There's a lot of stuff about how they had to get the permissions and how certain landowners threatened to break their legs if they were seen boating down the river in that little part again. And a brief mention of how the festival stopped in 1985, but a very brief mention. I would have put a little insert here. In fact, Mr. Parker Pearson tells us that he was at one of these Stonehenge free festivals, so we may have coincided. Whether or not he was tripping his bollocks off, as I was, he doesn't say. He might have been there with a little dustpan, gathering evidence. In any case, this is another example of a book you pluck off a shelf in a second-hand bookstore. You get it for a nice cheap price. It made me a lot cleverer than when I started reading it, although I did find the first part, as I say, a little bit technical. But if you want to know about Stonehenge and get the latest info and gen about it, it is readable when it gets going, and if you're fascinated by Stonehenge, you'll be fascinated by this.